Today we have a special treat. It's Evan Yu from Vite. Welcome, Evan.
Hello, nice to be here.
Happy to have you. Now, as we record this, we're together, but as it ships out to our audience, you are going to be at the first ever in-person ViteConf. That has to be exciting.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Vite's come a long way, I think, since you first started it to a live in-person conference with a Cult.Repo, formerly Honeypot, classic documentary as well, shipping about Vite. You probably didn't have such grand ambitions when you first got started, did you?
Definitely not. We really just started as similar to Vue. It started as this like random idea, like what if I just do this, and then just started hacking on it and got something interesting, and then kept pushing on, and eventually, more people started using it.
What was that idea? I think this is going back to the Webpack days. I think Webpack was the bundler of the day. And of course, that allowed a lot of things, but it was also complicated and sometimes frustrating and lots of configuration. What was the idea you originally had with Vite that was worth hacking on?
Yeah, so the original idea, so obviously I worked on Vue for a long time. And for Vue, we built this whole CLI that wraps Webpack called Vue CLI. And one day I was just trying to reproduce a Vue bug that a user reported that came with this whole reproduction that requires running Vue CLI. And it was installing all the dependencies and getting the reproduction started. And it was taking so long. I was like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And the idea was really about loading a Vue single file component, right, directly over the network from the dev server without an actual build step. That was really what I was looking for initially. Mm-hmm. So the first prototype of Vite was actually back in 2019. It was called Vue/dev server, and it was really just a simple HTTP server that looks at the incoming request. If it's a Vue file, it'll just compile the Vue file on the fly and send it back to the HTTP request. I had that prototype done very early on, played around with the idea. I liked it because, the experience I wanted was really something closer to a normal local HTTP server that I could just start on demand. And then when I import a Vue file, I want the file to be compiled into JavaScript automatically when I request it. Later on, I realized, okay, this idea actually applies not just to Vue files, right? If I load a TypeScript file, if I import a TypeScript file, it should come back with the compile.js too. That was also the time when more browsers started to support native ESM imports. So previously, if we were to write something like import foo from a file, we had to first bundle it with Webpack, right? Because browsers couldn't just load native ESM. But in 2019, more browsers started to ship that. And that really got me start thinking, okay, like what if we can just use this to build a whole dev environment, right? You just import things on demand, it gets compiled, transpiled on demand on the server side, and you get the compiled JavaScript back. So in 2020, the first prototype in 2019 actually got I dropped it aside because I couldn't figure out how to do hot module replacement with it. So I kept thinking on about it. I was also working on Vue 3 at the time. So that idea kind of stayed in sort of a prototype status for a very long time until in April 2020, it somehow clicked. Like I was like, hey, maybe we can do hot module replacement over native ESM just by doing this and that, right? So I started hacking around the idea. I pulled out the old prototype, trying to add the hot module replacement logic on top of it. And it kind of worked, right? So that got me really excited. And that was like the real start of Vite as a real idea.
There were other contenders at the time, right? There were other people working on this problem, I think.
Yeah.
Snowpack.
Yeah.
I remember Snowpack.
Yep.
At some point, there was one called WMR. I'm not sure the time frame of that one.
Yeah, I think, WMR was around the same time. Jason Miller worked on that. I think he also kind of worked on it in stealth for a bit of time. He kind of teased about it on Twitter. When it came out, I believe it was modeled after Rollups API. That's also the source of inspiration for Vite to support Rollup plugin API as well. Yeah. And Snowpack also came around at the same time. The interesting thing with Snowpack is we kind of went from very different directions, right? Vite started as this sort of, if we can load modules with native ESM and do hot module replacement. And then we realized, okay, if we load every file this way, it will actually be slow, because if you have a NPM dependency that has like hundreds and thousands of modules, right, it actually gets quite slow. So we were looking for a way to sort of, first of all, combine these individual modules in node modules into fewer files. And also, some of the node modules shipped were in CommonJS, which we can't load natively over ESM. So we had to pre-transform them into ESM so that we can load them in the browser. So we were looking for something that would handle that part. Snowpack started out as something that does exactly that, right? The first version of Snowpack was explicitly say, let's convert all your CJS dependencies into ESM, right? And then they later on added the capability to do, like, say, transpile on the fly and to do hot module replacement. Essentially, they added on a dev server to that. And we started out as a dev server, but then tried to later on add this dependency compilation part, right? So we went from like two opposite directions to eventually become very similar in scope. So there was a period where we were pretty much just shipping features left and right. We're kind of doing the same thing in parallel.
And at a certain point, Vite kind of busted out from the notion, at least the one that I had, and I think others shared, that it was for Vue. Like, if you're not using Vue, Vite's usable, but really it's built for Vue. And that may have never been true, but the reputation was that, or that just the association was there.
Yeah. So the very first version of Vite was definitely for Vue only, right? But I think we got it to, I was working on it halfway. So we got all the way up to like, there was a long period of like 0.x releases, and we got all the way up to 1.0 RC. At that time, the internals was still very specifically designed for Vue. For example, the whole compilation logic of handling Vue single file components was directly inside Vite itself for version 1. And it was kind of an afterthought that we added this like additional way of like transpiling, say, TypeScript. And in version 1, we also did that through middlewares, right? So you need to like add your own server middleware that intercepts like a custom file format, then transpile it into JavaScript. And I was then looking, before we shipped to 1.0, I was looking at this whole API design. And I realized, okay, like that was the point when I also started looking into WMR a bit more. And I realized, look, WMR is actually having this thing called a plugin container that abstracts away the plugin hosting interface for Rollup. So you can actually run a Rollup plugin without Rollup itself, not in the browser, but in WMR, right? So WMR is able to run process Rollup plugins both during the development server and in the production build. So we realized, okay, if we do that too in Vite, right, we can support not just Vue components. We can support TypeScript. We can support TSX, JSX. We can support even Svelte, right? So that got me started thinking about refactoring the way we handle these custom file formats. And that eventually led to a complete rewrite. So we never actually shipped 1.0. I was like, we were already in 1.0 RC like 25 or something.
Really?
I was like, we gotta like just completely rethink this. So I started a whole rewrite that eventually became Vite 2. Yeah, and that rewrite took like another like 3 to 4 months, I believe.
So you never shipped 1, but then you shipped 2?
Yeah, we just went directly to Vite 2. Yeah.
And how long did you say that the difference was in timing between the two? The RC and the V2?
Can't remember the exact date we started working on RC, but I first talked about the idea in like April 2020. That was like the first 0.x version of Vite.
Uh-huh.
And Vite 2 was shipped in February 2021.
Okay. So I remember this part from the documentary, so I was able to see a rough cut of the doc, and Fred Schott, who's the Snowpack author, and I'm sure a friendly competitor at the time. You know, you have the spirit of open source competition, but everyone's kind of rooting for everyone. At least that's the way I play the game. He's telling the story of this December time period where, you know, he's spending time with his family, and all of a sudden Evan starts committing like crazy. I don't know if that's dramatized for the doc. And of course, they do a great job with these documentaries. They show like they have this like close up view of your contribution graph, and all of a sudden, like, you know, little green dots start to show up in December, and then into January, and he's like, Evan cracked the nut or something like this. You know, like he figured something out that got you excited to like really start going on it. Is that approximately true?
Yeah. Actually, looking back at the days, I think the idea of like dropping RC and just go directly to 2.0 was like, it started exactly in December 2020.
Oh, okay.
At the start of December. Yeah. So
people were still waiting for 1.0.
Yeah, people were waiting.
Ostensibly, they're like, man, this is the longest release candidate ever.
Never landed.
Yeah, never ended. And then here comes 2.0. So at that point, did you get the groundswell of adoption and support once 2 hit? Was that when Vite really started to... Because, I mean, the adoption story since then has been astronomical, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think 2.0 really was the real starting point of, you know, real momentum in terms of adoption. Because people saw, okay, like, people knew about Vite 1, right, before 2.0. Some people were already using it, excited about it. But 2.0 was really the version that made people realize, okay, like, this is more than just for Vue. It can actually be a proper tool for other frameworks as well. I think that also started, we started seeing other frameworks actually adopting Vite and building on top of it. So that's that really kicked things off.
That's a beautiful thing, right? Because there's so much framework. There's fractals of frameworks in the JavaScript community, and each one for a long time had their own build tools, you know, their own Webpack thing. Or like Vite did. You guys are like, well, we're going to build one for Vue. And then eventually it's nice to see some coagulation and some really rallying around a tool so that everybody can benefit, and helps with that paradox of choice to a certain extent. It's like, everyone's just using Vite now, so let's just all do that. And one less decision to make, right?
Yeah. I mean, that definitely took some time. I think Svelte was the earliest like sort of non-Vue framework to embrace Vite. Because I think Rich Harris was working on SvelteKit at that time. SvelteKit was initially built on top of Snowpack. So when we were working on Vite, I think at one point the Svelte team eventually decided to switch from Snowpack to Vite. And then the Snowpack team themselves started working on Astral. And later on, they also decided, okay, we want to focus more on Astral. We want to focus on the framework layer instead of maintaining our own bundler, which our own dev server bundler / everything that does more or less the same thing as Vite. So Astral eventually switched over from Snowpack to Vite as well. So these are probably the two of the earliest sort of frameworks that decides to just build on top of Vite instead of reinventing the wheels.
So what was your own trajectory like with regard to Vue.js and Vite? I don't know your history around. Did you leave the Vue project? Or are you still?
We're still working on it.
Still working on the Vue project?
Yeah. I spent a lot less time directly on Vue myself. We do have other team members still working on features and maintaining it. But, you know, the reason we created Vite was because I wanted to use it with Vue. So obviously we switched all the default tooling of Vue over to Vite.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Vue plugin was actually what I used to validate the design of our plugin interface. And later on, we also have Nuxt, which was the main meta framework in the Vue ecosystem. So Nuxt 3 was in development when Vite 2 was introduced. Originally, it was again built on top of Webpack. So when they found out that Vite is coming out, I think what they did is I think a smart thing they did with Nux 3 in the beginning is they made the core logic of Nux 3, the framework, bundler agnostic. So it can actually work with different builders. So it can work with Webpack. It can also work with Vite, right? So when they saw Vite was out, they immediately started refactoring things so it can work with Vite. And eventually the default version of Nux 3 was also shipped with Vite as the default build tool.
One of the things that I'm very impressed by you, Evan, is your ability to foster communities around your projects. And you've had so many, I mean, even Vite has so many amazing contributors, Anthony Fu, Matthias Capoletto, I can't remember his last name, Paytac. Like, those are just two examples of a lot of people.
Yep.
Is that something you do intentionally? Did that just kind of happen? Like, how do you get these amazing devs to come alongside and then, like, you know, Vue is maintained and continue to be worked on largely by people that aren't yourself? That's an accomplishment. How do you do that?
To be honest, with the two projects, I kind of handle things a bit differently. With Vue, I would say we're really lucky to have, you know, first of all, like for any project to have capable and, you know, ambitious contributors stepping up. It's something you kind of, you're lucky to have any kind of these people, right? Regardless of what you do intentionally or not. So first of all, you got to have these people. If you're lucky enough to have some people like this, right? It's important to sort of encourage them, acknowledge their efforts, and just make them feel that their contributions are being valued, right? In a lot of ways, I think for the Vue project, it's very organic. We don't really do any sort of like trying to ask for contributions or try to like find people explicitly to do these things. Most of the time, we notice a pattern. Someone is already very, you know, actively involved. They seem to be passionate about the things they're doing. So what we do is basically acknowledge them and empower them and make them feel like, okay, like you're now part of this, right? And your contributions will now impact a lot of people. Obviously, there's the financial part of it too. Vue is still independent. We have a decent number of sponsorships and we redistribute them among the team members. So many of the maintainers who work on Vue now they are sponsored through our Open Collective or directly through GitHub sponsors. So we basically redistribute the sponsorships coming into Vue to people who actually work on Vue. That helps, but again, Vue is a very loosely organized team, so people would come and go. We have quite a few people on the team who've been with us for like close to a decade, right? So Eduardo, who maintains the router, and Pina, our official statement management library, he's been with us like forever. One of the earliest to join, and he's still working on things. And we also have people who've maybe contributed very actively for a year or two, and then they just disappear, which is totally fine because that's how open source works.
That's how it works, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, you know, it's a combination of people who joined and just stick around, or people who, you know, joined, left, but so they still left something really valuable to the project. So for Vue, it's very, I would say it's very unintentional. Like we're really lucky to have these people.
Kind of just happened.
Yeah, kind of just happened. For Vite, I would say is a little bit different because I think once I shipped to version 2, I was aware that now I have to basically split my attention between Vue and Vite. So my original plan was I'm going to go back to focus on Vue because we still haven't shipped Vue 3 at that point. I basically took this huge detour. People were waiting for Vue 3, but I ended up building Vite as kind of as a way of procrastination.
Was anybody mad about that?
I don't know. I think it turned out to be like a net positive, right?
Yeah.
You wait a bit longer for Vue 3, but you end up also having Vite. But the idea was, okay, I need to go back and focus on Vue 3 now. So I need someone to sort of help me take care of Vite in a way. So I made a explicit post. I said, okay, like we're setting up a team for Vite. If you're interested, you should join. And that was, I believe, when at that time I think Matthias was already very actively involved. He started, I think his first few PRs were mostly documentation. He was just helping us on like adding additional details in the documentation, started digging into the internals a bit. And he was very, very active with the community. He was on the Discord server. He was basically everywhere, answered all the questions. So I was like, well, this guy seems very enthusiastic about Vite. I should probably encourage him to kind of help us with the long-term maintenance of it. And he was really happy to join too. So so Matthias became the very, I think he's literally the first team member, and also very, very, played a very critical role in the initial sort of growing the community and making these additional team members feel they are, being welcomed and appreciated.
Yeah. I've met Matthias. He is very good at that. Lots of enthusiasm, lots of care and kindness that just kind of oozes out of the guy.
Yeah.
When you go in to offer him something like that, like what is the Vite side? What's the offer? Like, what does he get? Do you get your name on the, on the core team? Do you get this, that, or the other thing? Like, is there some sort of formalization of what that looks like? Or is it just like, hey, why don't you do more of what you're doing?
I think for the initial, when we set up the team, it was like purely voluntary. We were basically saying, okay, you get to call yourself a team member, and that's
Right.
it. Yeah, because
which is not nothing.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, it was very much like you're already doing this, so we just want you to keep doing this for the recognition of being a team member.
Yeah.
We had no plans around like how Vite will turn out in the long run, but I think a very lucky event happened because StackBlitz, which is now the company behind Bolt, they actually haven't come up with the idea of Bolt back then. That was like in 2022. They were mostly still working on their web containers technology. StackBlitz, the dev environment, right? So it's a in-browser development environment, and they were looking for a dev setup that just starts up faster than Webpack, and they found Vite. So they were really excited, and they started looking for people who are working on Vite. So they actually hired Matthias to work on Vite full time. So that was what allowed Matthias to be able to spend a lot more time on Vite. So that's like,
Nice.
3.5 years ago.
Quick side story on StackBlitz. We had them on JS Party a couple of times because doing cool stuff in the browser. And the second time, I think, or maybe the third time that one of them came on, it was to talk about Tutorial Kit. Tomek Solkowski came on. And after that show, he's like, hey, we have this cool thing that we're just about to launch called Bolt. You want to try it out? You want to see what it is? And this was before, they had no idea. Because, Bolt just was like a rocket, ship, just stratosphere launch. But they had no, he's just like, this is a little side project we're doing. Check it out. And I'm like, this thing's pretty cool. He's like, yeah, we're going to ship it next week. We'll let you know how it goes. And like now they've renamed, like it's formerly StackBlitz. It's still out there, I think, but like, talk about a pivot. That's
totally,
an amazing match for them, I'm sure.
Yeah. They actually debuted Bolt at ViteConf. They also showed me like a week before. It was like, well, this looks cool, but I'm not sure how far this is going to go, because I think like initially at that time, I was still a bit skeptical about the general capabilities of LLMs in general. But
that's funny because when you showed it to me, I thought the same thing. I'm like, this is neat. Like it seemed like a kind of a cool toy was my thought. Like this seems like a good example of something that the StackBlitz team could do. But I never expected it to be like a product that would just, take over their entire company. So congrats to them, of course. And I'm sure they were pleasantly surprised that it went so well.
Yeah.
So what about this documentary? This is the second time you've been documentarized, right? Didn't they do a VJS documentary?
They did. It's actually from the same team.
Yeah, exact same team. Round 2. What is that process like as like a everyday hacker? All of a sudden it's like put on some nice clothes, going to get interviewed in front of hot lights and stuff. Is this something that you enjoy, you put up with because it's good for the projects? Like, how do you approach these things?
Yeah, I think again, like the two times, it's the same team, but it feels quite different. For the Vue one, the team was largely sponsored by Honeypot, and when they came to us, when they came to me about the Vue idea, I was like, sure, sounds great. Because Vue was, I think the Vue documentary was done. Can't remember exactly which year it was, but I was still living in suburban New Jersey. And they actually managed to fly all the way to New Jersey, come to my house to film it. But the vibe was still quite casual. They filmed me like making coffee and everything.
Yeah.
And then I think we met again when I was speaking at Laracon in New York, 2019. They went to the Laracon venue and filmed a bunch of stuff there. Taylor Otwell was actually in that documentary too.
Nice.
But they were very professional back then. I mean, the director Josiah, he's amazing. So did a lot of the thing is they are able to not only make fancy edits, but also they actually understand the story behind these things. They ask the right questions, and they're able to properly tell the story behind the technologies. I think that's the impressive part. So this time when they approached about another documentary, actually this time, this is after Honeypot actually folded. So they now have to work on these documentaries by securing their own funding, right? Okay. So they now have a new company. They do need to basically secure sponsorships or sponsors to make these documentaries. So they approached me and basically just trying to ask me, do you have any ideas? Can you introduce us to some companies or projects that would be looking to make documentaries about their technologies? And I was like, hey, we can make one about Vite. And
gotcha.
Yeah, and they were like, wait, this sounds like a great idea. We should totally do this.
Yeah. So you or VoidZero, you bankrolled it basically, or how does it work?
Yeah, so VoidZero obviously is supporting the documentary. We are the main sponsor, but we also managed to secure a few sponsorships from other companies that are either using Vue or actively involved in the Vue ecosystem. So StackBlitz is one of them. Sentry, Shopify, Bolt, and Supabase.
Nice.
Yeah. So we have quite a few interesting companies backing this documentary too.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that side of it. I knew that they had renamed. I wasn't sure about the rename Honeypot to Cult.Repo. And that's a really cool model because they do a great job of telling these stories and making them interesting. That's always the thing. You're like, it's the story of an open source project. It's a bunch of nerds writing, code. How could that be interesting? But actually, it is interesting, and they do a good job of making it that way. And so I think these things need to exist and continue to be made. And so if hopefully this works out for them and for you all to be worth it as an effort.
I think they are working on quite a few additional ones in parallel. So I think they did one with Rails, I believe.
Yep, I think that one's out there. And then we just helped promote the Python documentary as well.
Yeah, the Python one,
August.
The Angular one.
Yeah,
they're doing a lot of great stuff, and I think it's definitely needed for the dev community.
Yeah, it's so cool to be featured as a person who writes software to have your story told. I think is especially because it's never the story of one person. Maybe it starts with Evan You, but then the story actually weaves in and threads through all these people's lives.
Totally.
And
yeah,
it's really neat.
It is. This is. Yeah, I believe this is the great part, right? In a way, every time I see these documentaries starting with a big shot of me, I feel a bit uneasy. I feel like I don't want these documentaries to be about just one person, right? Because it's in a way tech open source is about people, so these documentaries should be about people. Yeah. So
they do a good job of capturing that as well. So I've been curious about VoidZero since you made the announcement. This is a new direction for you, I suppose, because prior to Vue, weren't you working at a big tech company? Was it Facebook or where were you working?
I was working at Google, when I created Vue.
Right. And then you went
was-
indie and open source.
Yeah, I left Google in 2014, but I left Google to work at a startup called Meteor, which was also a startup working on open source JavaScript framework.
Meteor.js?
Meteor.js, yeah.
I didn't know you worked there. Okay.
Yeah, I spent less than 2 years. So I left Meteor in 2016. So I officially became, fully independent in 2016. That's when I started working on Vue full time, which means I've been working independently for like 9 years now.
Almost a decade.
That's long. Yeah, that's a long time.
And you're kind of a poster child for like, this can work. Like the open source independent thing with sponsorships can work. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. And in fact, for most people, it doesn't work in that particular model. But for you, it was working. And so it was you were kind of inspiring to a lot of us to say, okay, well, if Evan can do it and he can get his commercial support enough to stay independent and still provide for his family, et cetera, maybe the rest of us can too.
Yeah, I think that I always consider myself lucky to make that work. Because to be honest, like when I started doing it in 2016, I had no idea if it was going to work.
Yeah.
I was like, let's just YOLO. Anyway, I was like, I want to just work on this thing full time and let's see how long it lasts.
Right.
Worst case scenario, I'm just going to go back and look for another job. But, it was just so fulfilling to be able to work on something that you just work on that one thing,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. That being said, I think we could probably count maybe on two hands, maybe not just one hand, but two hands, people that have made that work like you have. It is the exception. It's not the rule.
It is definitely an outlier kind of thing. In fact, a lot of open source maintainers have came to me over the years asking for advice. How can we make this work? And in a way, my response was always like, look, it's hard to replicate exactly what I did. There's no like real formula that you can just follow.
Yeah.
It depends a lot on the kind of project you have, even if your project is like wildly popular, like what kind of layer it sits on also kind of determines a lot, because like for a framework like Vue, you get massive exposure and constant interaction with your users.
Yeah.
Right? And people also it's easier for people to feel more closely associated to a framework that they use every day compared to something that sits lower level. The more lower level it is, the more difficult for you to get this sort of connection with your users.
Mm-hmm.
Like an example I've always used is Babel, because I was friend with the maintainer of Babel for a while, Henry Zhu. He was the lead maintainer of Babel for a while, and they've always struggled with funding because even though almost everyone used Babel, right? Because it's just one of the dependencies. Once you set it up, it just sits there.
Right.
You don't think about it anymore. Right? It was extremely difficult for them to do the same kind of model Vue was doing because they just don't get enough eyeballs. So, yeah, over the years, we've seen a few other examples successfully sort of making this work. But yeah, I've also seen so many cases where they're trying to do what we do, but it's very challenging.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think Webpack was one that was making it work as well. Maybe because, again, they're right there in your face. It's a build tool that you use every day. And for a long time, well, they had a good evangelism as well and large corporations using them. And so it became kind of cool to support Webpack because it was an example of like supporting open source back in the early days of that movement. What do you think about a lot of these efforts to somehow calculate out dependencies and maybe distribute out, redistribute from the top down, like from the Vue.js down to, or from the Vite to the Babels of the world. And kind of do it that way because there's so many fundamental aspects of software that are completely invisible to the end user, but they aren't usually invisible to the one who pulled them in originally, and so maybe we can do it that way. I know there's been lots of efforts to do that. I wonder your thoughts on it.
Yeah, there's a project called Thank You Dev, thankyou.dev, I believe. Vite and Vue are actually on there too, but we receive such a small fraction compared to what we receive from, let's say, GitHub sponsors. And given like the amount of Vue's usage in the wild, I can kind of imagine how little maintainers of smaller packages actually get. Right? I think this model is fundamental. Like, I think the intention is obviously good. The idea of like consumers open source should try to support the dependencies you're using, right? Like in theory, that's what everyone should do. I think the fundamental problem is the donation or sponsoring open source is just not a thing in many of these companies, right? So if we think about like who are actually getting the biggest value out of open source, right? It's directly proportional to the scale you're operating at. So an individual developer, if you're just making a sort of side project, you're using open source, you're not even creating value yourself. So asking them to donate to the open source project, maybe they'll like donate $1 or $2 a month. That's like, in the grand scheme of things, that's negligible. But if you think about a big corporation that's like making billions of revenue, they're also using so much open source. But it's, I guess, like for larger projects like Linux or Kubernetes, right, they can operate in very, very different way. They have foundations, they have bigger companies just backing those foundations. But many other open source projects kind of fall into this category where, you're not big enough for these big companies to say, hey, we need to like somehow have a strategic sort of thing to support it. But you're also large enough that you have such a, maintenance burden that it's no longer sustainable if you're just one person, right? Or people just like spending after work hours, spare time, because you could have been spending that time with your family, but now you're somehow, obligated to support all your free open source users, right? So I think that's the unfortunate sort of state of things for a lot of open source projects is they are creating value for these commercial entities, businesses that's actually, sort of using their open source projects. I wouldn't say it's close to free riding in a way, right? But it's also because like in a lot of ways, we start a lot of these open source projects just because we want to share with people. We just want to put the stuff out there, right? But then people unintentionally find themselves in this awkward spot where your thing kind of blew up. It's making a lot of impact, right? Now you have a lot more responsibilities, but it's also like very difficult to make the companies that are getting the most out of the thing you create to sort of contribute back properly. I think that's a systematic challenge in the way a lot of independent open source projects work nowadays, right? So obviously, some of them eventually start companies, right, to sort of turn it into a real business, right? But for it's just not a thing that everybody wants to do, and it's also maybe not feasible for a lot of the projects.
Yeah. I think the corporate open source support movement had some steam up until the market correction when money became tight. And then it was like, well, now we're doing layoffs and now we're tightening the belt. We're not going to, give money away that we don't have to. And so it's lost steam. But was your then idea with VoidZero, because probably Vite could just continue like Vue does, right? Like you probably just do the support. Like I'm not saying Vite is VoidZero, but like you yourself and your team have made it in terms of support. I'm assuming continuous.
Yeah, I think for Vite, it actually has a similar challenge because it's a very high visibility project, but it's not as it's still a little bit different from Vue in the sense that it's not a framework in itself. So
true, but it has Evan-U and it has it's a command that you type into your terminal, right? Like you're using it actively. It's not hidden from you. And so do you think, like, I guess, where was your thinking with VoidZero and Vite? Was it like, we're not going to do the same model that we did last time? Or did you want a new challenge or were you bored? I wonder where you're coming from.
There are multiple, it's a combination of multiple factors. So one thing is my experience view with the sustainability side of Vue is that the success of Vue is an outlier and has a lot of luck involved, right? The timing, the fact that Vue was able to become now the second largest framework has a lot to do with doing the right thing at the right time. And for Vite, we noticed that we were getting some sponsorship for Vite as well, right? But I no longer want to, I guess for Vue, the model was that I was still doing most of the work, right? It's not like I'm not trying to take all the credit, but over the years, I was still the main person that was driving Vue forward, making the main decisions, shipping the main features, and all that. So I was also making most of the financial decisions for the project. But for Vite, I essentially wanted to, how about let's make this thing a bit more, decentralized so that more people can actually work on it full time. So it's not me having to be fully responsible for the financial side of it. That was the initial hope. But then we realized, this sponsorship model really, really has its limits. Over the years, we are able to call Vue sustainable, right? But if you think about the amount of users we have, Vue has 2 million weekly active users based on how many people are using our DevTools extension.
Right.
If we were a business and we're only getting the amount of sponsorships we get today, which is less than $1 million a year, that's right? If it's a business, it's not a very successful business.
Right.
Yeah. So
successful open source project, not successful business.
Yeah, in terms of conversion rate, right?
Right.
So it's all relative. But imagine if you're a business with 2 million users and you're only making this much. That's not a lot. So for Vite, what I realized is actually in terms of sponsorship conversion, Vite is doing worse than Vue because it sits a layer lower. It's not a direct framework people interact with. So people has less sort of this idea, I need to support the tool I'm using, because a lot of people are still using Vite through a framework. For example, they're using SvelteKit, they're using React with Vite, they're using Vue with Vite, right? So they're still thinking primarily about the framework instead of this tool.
Plus, Vite perhaps is also the Vue people, perhaps also the people who are using Vite with Vue, they may already be supporting Vue, and they think, well, I'm already supporting these people.
Yeah, right.
So that's possibly a part of it as well.
Yeah. So for me, I was thinking, I want to make Vite independently sustainable aside from Vue. I never want to sort of just mix these two projects, right? Because when we decided to make Vite framework agnostic, I was Vite is going to be its own thing, right? It needs to find its own way, own path to sustainability. And on the other hand, I was also witnessing this trend where Vite is becoming this shared infrastructure between a lot of frameworks, right? So multiple different frameworks are building on top of Vite.
Yeah.
So I saw this opportunity to say, because we think about, when we talk about JavaScript ecosystem, it's always churn, fragmentation, things come and go, right? But it's quite rare for multiple frameworks to be betting on the same thing at the same time. And a lot of these people are smart people that I also really, really respect, Rich Harris, Fred, so I was look, people are betting on Vite. Vite is serving a much bigger responsibility. So I do foresee it also needs more substantial resources to support its long-term viability, right? So, and then we start thinking about what can we do to make Vite better? And that's a lot of work when I think about it, right? And if we keep going the way Vue is doing, what I really worry about is what if we can't make Vite sustainable enough, and it just eventually, people will have to switch away from it when it is no longer well maintained. And that's another big churn for the ecosystem because so many things already depend on it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't want that to happen. So I was thinking, can we find a way to leverage Vite to serve as this like sort of gateway to more unification in the ecosystem, so we can maybe build more fundamental stack from the bottom up, to sort of make leverage Vite to unify more things in the ecosystem. At the same time, if we can make all the work on these parts sustainable through a business, I think that's better than seeing so many people just working independently on a bunch of stuff, supporting tools, and then they burn out, they give up the project, they walk away, and then the next group of people come in and come up with a new alternative, and this cycle just keeps going on for the JS ecosystem, right? Because I've seen so many of this, like such instances happen in the past.
Sure.
And I just don't feel like it's in a way, what I'm seeing is people keep redoing the work, and then they try to figure out sustainability, and many of them fail, and then they give up, they move on to other things, and now we are stuck with an ecosystem of like every problem has like 5 solutions, 4 of them abandoned, and now you have to like try to find new maintainers or new people. A new developer will come up with a new project. I think in the early days of the JavaScript ecosystem, having so many people just stepping up and creating solutions to problems is the strength of the ecosystem, right? And that's what made the JS ecosystem great. But over time, a lot of the problems have, in a way, the ecosystem has matured, right? We are arriving at more conventions and best practices on some of these problems that we can more or less consider solved problems, right? So we want to kind of, find a way to provide a very solid solution to these solved problems. And we want to make it well-sustained through a good business model. Maybe not a good business model, but at least the business model needs to be good enough so that people can stop worrying about like, hey, well, these people just one day burn out because they can't find enough funding and just walk away, right? And I think the key to cracking that problem is to make the right people pay for open source, right? And that won't happen through donations. That is kind of the conclusion I sort of arrived at after all these years of working on independent open source.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing to say coming from you, because you're probably one of the best donation receivers out there. And if you say that, then it's got to be true. Okay, so VoidZero then, like, how does it work? What's the business model? You talk about these fundamental pieces underneath Vite, or like where do those lines drawn? I have so many. It's a cloudy thing to me right now. Please help me understand it. Yeah.
So at VoidZero, we're building a unified toolchain for JavaScript, right? Okay. So the scope is quite large. So we would cover. So obviously there's Vite, which is at the center of it. It's a dev server. It's also a production bundler, and then we have vtest, which is the test runner. Then we have the linter, which is based on OXC. And inside Vite, we were previously relying on ESBuild and Rollup. Like, we rely on 2 different bundlers. There's a lot of reasons we did that, because the technical limitations on both sides, and we just kind of have to combine the strength of both. So now we built our own Rust-based bundler called Rowdown that kind of combines the strength of ESBuild and Rollup and Webpack. In a way, we needed the best bits of those, different solutions that we just couldn't get them working together. But now we actually built something that would perfectly suit the needs of Vite itself, and while being more powerful. And in order to support Rowdown itself, at the lower level, we have all the parser, transformer, resolver, all written in Rust in the form of OXC, which is a collection of these lower level tools. Mm-hmm. So essentially, we want to have this vertical, unified integrated stack that supports all the way up from Vite, from the parser all the way up to Vite, and then extend into test linked, so that you can have a cargo-like experience. If you've worked with Rust, right, when you start learning the language, the toolchain you use is cargo, and it covers most of the things you need out of the box. For JavaScript, we never had that kind of experience. And in a way, we're so used to, so when people get into web dev, right, the first thing you need to do is to decide which framework you want to use, and then which build tool, which linter, which test runner. There are a bunch of conventions and best practices, but still, it's a lot, right? People will feel lost when you just try to set things up for the first time.
Yes.
We want to see if we can provide a sort of more coherent and unified experience to that, right? So one unified toolchain to do all these things. And at the same time, we want to make sure this thing is, well-funded, which means we are planning to do a business model where we want to charge from businesses actually making decent amount of money instead of individuals. So we'll probably disclose more when we announce Vite Plus as a product, which is the name of the tool chain is called Vite Plus. So we'll share more details at the conference. But the general idea is this is not a thing that can be sustainable if you only try to get donations from individuals, right? We want to make sure that we are still keeping a very low barrier of entry. Like if you're open source, if you're individual, if you're even maybe a small business or educational, academic entities or governmental entities, you should be able to just use this thing without any restrictions. But if you are a business that's having decent amount of revenue, right? These are the targets that should be actually paying for the majority of the shares to support these efforts. So this is something we're trying to explore, and in a way, it's also my hope of finding a model that can sort of, because we haven't really seen other projects doing this kind of thing. I think there are maybe a few examples in the wild, but this is something we're trying to explore to see if we can make the right people pay for the. Essentially, we want the businesses to be subsidizing the wider use of these infrastructure level pieces in the JavaScript ecosystem.
And so to start this, did you raise money?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
And the reason for that was because you needed time to explore this, or?
Yeah, so the scope of this whole vision is obviously much bigger than what we can cover with just the sort of sponsorships or donations from like we did with Vue, right? If you want to build this whole thing from the ground up, you need a dedicated team of people, full-time efforts. And it also needs to be more structured than the voluntary model that Vue did, because with Vue, we never had any sort of goal. Like for Vue, there was no concrete goals of like what the end form of Vue should be. In a way, Vue's development was very much sort of user driven or community driven. In a way, we work on Vue, we fix issues, and then we discover problems users are facing, then we propose solutions to it, and then we just evolve organically, right? So it's not, Vue doesn't have sort of a fixed scope or a very concrete roadmap of what you need to achieve, say, in 5 years, right? But for this, I guess when I started having this idea, I realized, okay, like the things we want to do, it's a lot, right? It's a pretty big scope if you want to build a unified toolchain for JavaScript. And it's something you need a team of full-time members that's fully dedicated to this goal and work closely together. And the best way to do that is still to form a business and have them properly compensated so that we can sort of, in the short term, we don't need to think about how can we negotiate sponsorships or how can we get enough individuals to donate to us.
Gotcha. And so when you received the money, did you go out and then start hiring members of the Vite community, basically?
Yeah, so we hired quite a few team members from Vitess, from Vite, But we also had a few folks from ByteDance. They were working at the web infra team on ByteDance. So actually, a few of the earliest members of the company worked on the RSPack project at ByteDance. So they have a lot of experience and expertise in the Rust for JS tooling, which helped us kick off the initial efforts in this area. So the folks working on Rodan actually worked on RSPack.
Gotcha. Funny story. I used to call it RSPAC because no one ever told me how to pronounce it. And I had to say it on the show. And I'm like, it looks like RSPAC. They lowercase the S. It doesn't make any sense. But RSPAC makes way more sense than RSPAC for sure. Vite Plus. Is it Vite plus other features? Is it Vite but you pay for it? Is it bundled? Like, is it Vite is multiple things and we put them together and package them and that's what you use? Like, what is Vite Plus? I know if you haven't actually announced the details, but like, give me a shape of the object.
Sure. Yeah. So Vite Plus is a drop-in superset of Vite. So
drop-in superset. Okay.
If you're using Vite today, you can basically alias Vite to Vite Plus, and everything will continue to work the same way. But in addition to Vite Dev and Vite Build, you can now also do Vite Linked, Vite Test, Vite Bench, Vite Format.
I see.
Yeah, so it comes integrated with a lot more capabilities. So it's a tool chain instead of just a build tool.
And where and when is Vite Plus? Is Vite Plus out there? Is it going to be out there at ViteConf or?
So we're gonna talk about more details. We're probably gonna give a first demo of what Vite Plus looks like in action at ViteConf.
Okay.
Right now it's still in active development, so we probably want to save the sort of big reveal at the conference.
Sure, absolutely. So after the conference, if I'm Jerod, the open source hacker, and I want Vite Plus, I'll be able to use Vite Plus without any money, with money involved. I'm just Jerod the dev.
Jerod the dev, if you're just an individual hacker, you can definitely use Vite Plus without any restrictions.
Okay. Now I'm Jerod, the well-funded Fortune 500 company. I cannot use Vite Plus without money. Correct?
So you can still try it. You can still like just experiment with it. But if you are using it in any commercial capacity,
right,
you'll need to talk to us.
Are the individual components of Vite Plus separately open source or no?
Yes, they are.
So it's the packaged deal that is.
Yep. So the underlying components, which includes Vite, Rodan, OXC, Vitest, they remain open source, remain exactly what they are today. Vite Plus is a combination of these things plus a few more Vite Plus only features. So we are actually working on a integrated task runner / caching system for monorepos, which tightly integrates with all these underlying tools. So that allows us to smartly infer the input for each task that you run through the system. So we smartly cache the outcome of for example, if you run Vite build through Vite Plus, right? We know exactly what the inputs are and outputs are, so we just cache it automatically. So if you edit a file, but it doesn't actually affect the task you're running, you would just get a cached output automatically. Okay.
And that will be a Vite Plus thing. So does that require a VoidZero server somewhere in there?
It doesn't. Right now it's local.
Okay. Yeah. Do you imagine a world in which VoidZero servers are involved?
In the future, maybe, but we don't want to make that a requirement. So these will be probably more like value-added services, where it will make your remote caching with the system definitely will require some sort of server setup, but we'll probably make it we'll definitely make it feasible to use your own storage backend.
Gotcha. So as Jerod, the Fortune 500 software team, and I want to use Vite Plus, do you have it figured out in terms of my understanding of that whole deal? Where do you interface to me when I know I have to actually come give Evan and his team money? How does that, have you got that figured out yet?
So I don't want to get into too much details, but yeah. But we'll have a more formally documented how does this license work, the FAQ and everything.
Yeah.
We'll have that up on the website by the time we announce it.
But Vite and its subcomponents, they all remain open source licensed?
Yes.
And so this new Vite Plus will have its own proprietary license that you will tell more details about at ViteConf, right?
Yeah. So we'll probably call it source available still, right? So you'll be able to look at the source code, open issues on GitHub and everything. But we're trying to come up with a license that would make as many people able to use it freely as possible, but still allow us to, capture value from the right group of users that we believe who owe the most to supporting such infrastructure tooling for an entire ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And if this project succeeds, you believe or you hope that it will be reproducible by other people, right? Like whereas the previous one, Evan succeeded with Vue and with that sponsorship support, but it wasn't really a pattern that people could necessarily follow unless they were also outliers.
Yeah.
But your hope with VoidZero, it seems, and with Vite this time around is what if we can build something in such a way that you could take that pattern and perhaps in your neck of the woods or your little open source area of the world, reproduce it and create a sustainable project.
Yeah. If we can sort of be the first example of that, we can also normalize the acceptance of such a model in the corporate world where, there will probably be some challenges for companies to sort of realize, okay, this thing is actually using a different license, right? And if we can make this model sort of acceptable in the corporate world, where next time they see it, they go, oh, they're doing the same thing that Vite Plus is doing, right? Makes it easier for other people to replicate this.
So Vite is open source and Vite Plus is source available.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I hope it works. I'm excited to hear more as you announce the details at ViteConf. Appreciate all the efforts you put in over the years and I guess the trailblazing that you've done with Vue. And now with Vite, hopefully VoidZero is yet another trail blazed and one that people can follow after. And I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you.
Anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to get on the record or say to the open source world before I let you go?
Probably not. I mean, I probably said more than I was planning to, but yeah. But we're planning to announce all of this at VConf anyway. So well, there will be a lot more and a lot more details on the technical front, how Vite Plus feels, how it works, and everything at the conference. So make sure to tune in.
Well, I will have to wait, but nobody else will have to. By the time this is out to our listener and to our viewer, check out ViteConf, check out the Vite documentary because it's out there. It's to be watched. I've seen a rough cut and it's very good. You're going to enjoy it. So definitely tune in and see what Evan and his team are up to. All right, Evan, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.